Did you know that the very first professional teachers were often priests and medicine men?
Yeah, it's pretty surprising.
Or that the whole idea of academic freedom wasn't just invented recently. Scholars fought for it way back in ancient China. And believe it or not, some were even buried alive for their beliefs.
Incredible, isn't it?
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're really getting into the story of education. We're going to trace all those ancient springs and little streams that flowed together to become the huge river of education we see today. And this isn't just, a history lesson with dates and names. It's more of a journey to figure out how we got here. Why do schools look the way they do? What choices were made centuries ago that still affect us?
Exactly. And our mission here is to kind of pull out the most important nuggets, the key ideas from literally millennia of thinking about education and actually doing it.
Right.
So you'll get a quick but hopefully pretty thorough sense of the main goals, the methods, the big challenges that shaped learning across different times and places.
Helping you connect the dots, basically.
Yeah, connect those historical dots to what you experience, what you see in education right now.
Okay, so let's dive in right at the beginning. Primitive education, they call it. Now, today we think education is about personal growth, being creative.
Individual potential.
Exactly. But back then, totally different priorities. It was all about security and conformity. Basically, your education was considered done when you just fit the group standard.
And it gets even starker. Sometimes children weren't seen as, well, fully human in the way we think today. They could be treated almost like property, chattels.
Chattels? Wow.
Yeah, things that could be given away or, in really extreme situations, even killed.
That's a world away from our ideals.
It's a truly startling contrast, and the way they taught reflected that. Think tribal taboos, strict ceremonies, customs just hammered in by the elders.
Rigid.
Very rigid. The leadership was incredibly harsh because any young person trying something new, thinking differently, that was seen as dangerous, a path to chaos and cataclysm for everyone.
So who are the first actual teachers then?
Well, the first sort of professional teachers were the priests or the tribal officials, the medicine man, the witch doctor. Their job was mainly spiritual stuff, developing the rituals that kept the community glued together.
Okay, so right from the start, you see this tension, the group versus the individual.
Absolutely.
The main point wasn't thinking for yourself, it was survival, keeping the social order exactly as it was. And that debate, as you said, it just echoes down through history.
It really does. It's fundamental.
So from that idea of strict order, how does that compare to early Oriental education, say in China or India?
We see a very similar thread there, a strong, strong emphasis on fitting the individual into the existing system, individual development, not the priority.
It's secondary.
Very much secondary. The main goal was keeping the national ideals going, perpetuating the culture. And, proponents would point to the incredible lifespan of Chinese culture, 5,000 years, or Hindu culture, 4,000 years, as proof that this system, worked for stability.
Makes sense if stability is the absolute top goal. But it wasn't always smooth sailing, was it? You mentioned China earlier.
Right. That chilling story of Emperor Shi Huangti, he literally buried scholars alive.
Why? What did they do?
They dared to quote the classics against him. He was ruling by force, and they used historical precedent, traditional wisdom, to challenge him. So he destroyed their books, too. It's maybe one of the earliest, most brutal fights for what we'd now call academic freedom.
Just staggering.
And fast forward centuries, in this really strange historical twist, the U.S. actually gave back a huge amount of money, an indemnity payment to China.
Okay.
And China used that money to start a university specifically to prepare Chinese students to come study in America. Shows how complex these relationships become over time.
Definitely a complex shift. Okay, let's move west towards Hebraic education. This seems like a big turning point, moving towards Western thought.
It really was significant. The source highlights that the Jewish people were the only people of antiquity to attempt to teach everyone to read. That's huge.
Everyone. Why? What was the driving force behind that?
The core purpose was intense commitment to religious and moral ideals. The goal was living a life of holiness before the Lord. And this shared educational foundation, this literacy, was key to keeping their unity as a people, even when they were scattered across the globe.
And what about discipline? We hear a lot about strictness in ancient times.
Well, early on, yes. Proverbs in the Bible has lines like, "He that spareth his rod hateth his son." pretty clear support for corporal punishment.
Mhm.
But later, texts like the Talmud actually softened that stance a bit. They cautioned against physically punishing older students, specifically because it might instill a rebellious spirit. So you see an evolution in thinking there.
A subtle shift, but important. Okay, Greece. Sparta versus Athens. This is classic.
Almost literally. Two very different models. Spartan education was laser-focused on one thing, creating the ideal soldier.
Purely physical.
Mostly. Physical perfection and habits of complete obedience. They actually went out of their way to suppress feelings like generosity, sympathy, mercy, things they thought made you weak.
Wow. And discipline.
Notoriously severe and cruel. Public flogging was part of it. But here's an interesting contrast. Despite this incredibly harsh, male-dominated system, Spartan women actually held a relatively high social position compared to women in the East or even in Athens.
That is interesting. So Athens must have been the complete opposite.
In many ways, yes. Athenian education didn't really have a religious goal like the Hebrews. It was about civic instruction, developing, as they saw it, beauty and grace in body, mind, and spirit.
How did they learn?
They used wax tablets to write on, and memorization was huge,
Yeah.
especially classics like Homer. And then you get the sophists showing up.
Ah, the sophists.
Right. They started teaching skills not just for being a good citizen, but for personal enjoyment. Things like rhetoric, debate, basically skills you could use to get ahead, a bit more like a trade.
But then comes Socrates.
Exactly. The great counter-argument. He pushed back against the sophists' tricks of the trade, trying to spark a genuine love of truth and virtue.
Yeah.
His famous line, knowledge is virtue.
Those philosophical clashes, they just echo, don't they?
They absolutely do. And this period really sets up debates that educators still wrestle with. You have Plato, who really emphasized heredity, the idea that learning is mostly about drawing out what's already inside you, your innate potential.
Nature, basically.
Right. And then Aristotle, his student, put more weight on sensory experience and reason. He argued humans learn through observation, through interacting with the world.
Oh.
That's more nurture.
Nature versus nurture, right there at the start.
Precisely. And that tension, how much is inherent, how much is learned, has shaped educational thinking for centuries. Still does.
Okay, so that brings us to Rome, the great adapters.
That's a good way to put it. They took ideals from the Greeks, religious frameworks, maybe from the Hebrews, but their institutions, their systems, those were pure Rome. Their real genius was adaptation and application.
Like taking Greek philosophy.
And using it to figure out how to build better roads, bridges, aqueducts. Very practical.
And their school system. Was it for everyone, like the early Jewish ideal?
No, definitely not. It was strictly only for children of the wealthy. You typically start with a home tutor, often an educated Greek slave, interestingly enough, then move on to primary school, secondary school, and finally, rhetorical schools. Big focus on public speaking, oratory, and law. Useful skills for the ruling class.
So the purpose was clear.
Very clear. Roman education aimed to repress the freedom of the individual in the interest of the state. It was practical. And unlike in Athens, where manual labor was looked down upon, vocational education actually earned a highly respected place in Rome.
So just thinking about all this ancient history, it really forces you to consider what education is fundamentally for, doesn't it?
Absolutely.
Is it obedience, fitting in, physical power?
Yep.
Or is it about developing the mind, becoming a good citizen? These aren't new questions.
Not at all. They were asking them thousands of years ago, and we're still debating them today. It's fascinating.
Right. So from those ancient foundations, let's jump forward to the medieval period. The church really moves center stage here.
It does. Early Christian education was trying to find this balance, harmonizing individual freedom with social stability, but always with the view that life on earth was just temporary and probationary.
Preparation for the next life.
Exactly. And you saw different kinds of schools pop up. Catechumenal schools, just for basic religious teaching, catechetical schools to train church leaders, and later theological schools, cathedral schools for more advanced study.
And the monasteries played a big role too, right?
Huge role. Monastic schools became really influential. They were known for very strict discipline. The source mentions the rod was seldom spared.
Ouch.
Yeah, but they reached a peak under Charlemagne. He was really passionate about using education to develop smarter leaders, both for the church and for the state.
But then something really changes the game.
Yeah.
Universities start appearing.
This was revolutionary. Medieval universities started as guilds, basically, like trade guilds, but for scholars. They got charters from kings, emperors, or the pope.
which gave them.
A surprising amount of independence. They were largely free from church control and from political or secular control. Faculty and students even got special perks like not paying taxes and immunity from arrest by regular police.
Wow, privileges.
Definitely. And a really key idea for academic freedom back then was the licencia docenti ubique. It meant a qualified master teacher had a license to teach anywhere. Huge for spreading knowledge.
That's a powerful concept.
It is. And places like the University of Paris really fought hard to establish the faculty, the professors, as the real legal power within the university, setting the curriculum, granting degrees. That's the origin of academic self-governance we still see today.
And there's an interesting global connection here too, right, with Arab scholars.
Yes, absolutely crucial. Arab, or Saracen, scholars did incredible work preserving ancient Greek and Roman learning during Europe's Dark Ages. But they didn't just preserve it, they studied it, added to it, and later their work provided the spark, the impetus, that helped ignite the focus on humanities during the Renaissance in Europe.
Which brings us right to the Renaissance. A big shift in outlook.
A huge shift. It was a strong reaction, the source says, against the kind of gloomy outlook of the medieval period. Suddenly there's this celebration of human nature, a search for the joy of living.
And that changed the curriculum.
Oh yeah, it opened things up. Nature study became a thing. Physical training came back in a big way. Swimming, fencing, writing. It wasn't just about books and prayers anymore.
And we start seeing real innovation in teaching methods too.
Definitely. Especially from thinkers in Northern Europe, the Northern humanists like Erasmus.
Erasmus, right.
He was way ahead of his time. He argued for studying a child's individual nature, using games and play and learning, and being more humane with discipline. He really challenged rote memorization, verbatim memorizing, wanting instead to encourage independence and individuality.
That sounds incredibly modern.
It really does. It's a pivotal moment. Educators are starting to think about the child's own interests, their enjoyment as part of learning. That was pretty radical back then. And those Italian court schools, influenced by these ideas, became the blueprint for classical secondary schools all over Europe, including the Latin grammar schools that eventually came to colonial America.
Okay, so moving from the Renaissance into the more modern era, the Reformation hits, and that changes education's purpose again.
Big time. Protestant education had a very clear goal. It was intended for work rather than play. And crucially, the work must be for the glory of God.
So a very practical, spiritual focus.
Deeply practical. You see figures like Johann Bugenhagen setting up primary schools in Germany, teaching in the vernacular, the common language, not just Latin. They taught reading, writing, religion, singing, but also crafts and physical training. That was a big step forward for elementary education, making it more accessible.
Yeah, Martin Luther himself had ideas about the curriculum.
Oh, yes. He pushed for adding history, math, science, music, gymnastics, broadening things out beyond just religious texts.
Then comes the Enlightenment, and this brings a major philosophical split, right?
A really profound one. On one side, you have the rationalists, think Isaac Newton, Voltaire. They were driven by science, reason. But they tended to believe only a small elite and intelligentsia really had strong reasoning powers.
And everyone else.
Well, Voltaire kind of described the common man as basically destined to remain stupid and barbaric. He thought they needed a god and a king to keep them under control, a very hierarchical view.
Wow. Okay, so what was the counter-argument?
That came from naturalism, most famously from Jean-Jacques Rousseau. He threw out this revolutionary idea. Everything is good as it comes from the hands of the author of nature.
Challenging original sin.
Exactly. He argued children are inherently good. His idea for moral training was letting kids suffer the natural consequences of their actions. Don't just punish them arbitrarily. And he even said you should wait to teach religion until they're like 15, when they can supposedly reason about it better.
That must have been controversial.
Hugely. But these weren't just abstract ideas. You saw people trying to put them into practice, like Johann Baistow's school, the Philanthropinum.
Right, you mentioned that. What did they actually do?
They tried to apply Rousseau. Kids dressed like kids, not many adults. They learned Latin through conversation, not just grammar drills. They used games, went on field trips, made learning more enjoyable, more connected to real life. It's amazing to see those philosophical ideas directly inspiring actual schools.
It really is.
Right.
Okay, so philosophy is shifting, and then nationalism starts playing a bigger role in education, too.
Yes, the state gets much more involved. The French Revolution really hammered home the idea that education is a powerful tool for a government, a way to guarantee stability and permanence.
And who really ran with that idea first?
Prussia. They were the first to set up a truly national system of compulsory education. Thinkers like Fichte saw it as a way to regenerate the nation, a national regenerative force.
But there's a dark side to that, too.
A very dark side. The source points out the dangerous extreme this could lead to, like the indoctrination used by the Soviets and the Nazis. Education being used purely for state control and ideology.
A chilling reminder.
Definitely. And partly in response to that horror, UNESCO was founded after World War II, specifically to use education to promote peace and fight racist doctrines. Interestingly, the U.S. has always been a bit wary of centralized national control of education.
Right, it's mostly state and local here.
Exactly. Power rests mainly with the 50 separate states, which is why we still have constant debates about how much the federal government should be involved.
Okay, another huge development. Educational psychology starts to emerge. This revisits that old nature versus nurture debate.
It does. That long, endless dispute, as the source calls it, started by Plato and Aristotle. Later thinkers like John Locke emphasized experience knowledge comes from the external world. He also stressed that classic idea of a sound mind and a sound body. Physical well-being matters for learning.
And then things get more scientific.
Much more. With Edward Lee Thorndike, he was a pioneer of quantitative research in education, trying to measure learning scientifically.
Yeah.
He developed connectionism, or SR psychology. S for stimulus, R for response. The basic idea was that learning is about forming connections between things. A stimulus happens, you give a response. If the response is rewarded, the connection strengthens.
Like training an animal.
He drew heavily on animal experiments, yes. The idea was that maybe human learning worked on similar principles and could be studied, even engineered scientifically. It was a massive shift, though later challenged.
And this scientific impulse feeds into the progressive education movement.
In a way, yes, though progressive education took a different tack. John Dewey usually gets the credit, but Colonel Francis W. Parker is often called the father of it.
What was their core idea?
It was a move towards a child-centered school. The focus shifted to the child's own self-activity, their self-expression. They pushed back against rigid discipline, rote memorization, let kids learn by using real things, getting first-hand information.
Sounds great, but was it popular?
It was revolutionary, but definitely controversial. Critics jumped on it, saying progressive schools were coddling pupils, not teaching the fundamentals.
The basics.
Right. This led to a counter-movement, the essentialists, who argued for a return to basics, discipline, core subjects. And that kicked off this huge debate. What's more important? Developing the integrated personality, the whole child, socially, emotionally, or ensuring mastery of academic content.
And that debate is still very much alive today.
Oh, absolutely. That tension between rigor and holistic development. It's a central theme in almost every discussion about education policy and practice right now. These historical arguments have really long shadows.
Okay, let's really zoom in on the American experience now. How did education take shape here?
Well, that core idea of education for all, not just for the privileged, started really early, back in colonial times.
How was it funded back then?
Initially, often from income from public land set aside for schools or private subscriptions. Boston, 1635, is an early example. Then Massachusetts passed that famous 1647 law.
The one requiring towns to set up schools.
That's the one. Elementary schools and Latin grammar schools for older boys, usually heading for college or ministry. It even gave towns the power to levy taxes for schools, though, funny enough, the source notes that many preferred to pay the fine for not having a school rather than deal with the expense of actually running one.
Huh. Classic. And there were big regional differences, weren't there?
Huge differences. In New England, the idea of free public education for every child generally took hold. But in the South, free instruction was often seen as charity schools for the poor. Upper-class families typically hired tutors or sent their kids to private schools, often shunning the public option.
But the federal government did get involved early on, in a way.
Yes, crucially, through land grants. The ordinances of 1785 and 1787 set aside public lands in the new territories specifically to support schools. That was a very early, very significant federal investment in education.
So structure started evolving. What came after those early grammar schools?
Well, by the 18th century, people started demanding more practical skills. Not everyone was going to college or into the clergy. This led to English schools teaching things like bookkeeping, navigation, modern languages needed for trade.
More vocational.
Exactly. And then came the academy. Benjamin Franklin was key here. His 1749 proposal for an academy in Philadelphia led to a new kind of school offering a much broader curriculum, classics, sure, but also modern languages, science, practical arts.
And then the high school arrives.
Right. An early example is the English Classical School in Boston, 1821. Importantly, it wasn't initially meant just for college prep. It was more of a finishing school for boys not going to college. But by 1900, especially as cities grew, the public high school system just exploded. Phenomenal expansion.
And junior colleges came later.
Early 20th century. They filled a couple of roles, sometimes bridging the gap between high school and a four-year university, other times providing more advanced vocational or technical training, creating more pathways.
It wasn't just K-12 expanding, though. What about younger kids?
Preschool education started getting attention. Thinkers like Comenius talked about a school of infancy way back. Robert Owen started an actual infant school in Scotland in 1816. Then Friedrich Frogel coined kindergarten, children's garden.
Kindergarten, right. When did that arrive in the U.S.?
The first private one was started by Elizabeth Peabody in 1860. The first public kindergarten opened in St. Louis in 1873. And kindergartens actually had a big influence on elementary schools, especially by insisting that the classroom environment should be pleasant, even beautiful. A new idea then.
And education for adults.
That grew too. You had Lyceum's public lecture series featuring famous speakers like Emerson, YMCAs, YWCAs offered classes, evening schools popped up, all reinforcing this idea that learning isn't just for kids. Personal growth and development is a lifelong process.
What about children with special needs?
That awareness grew slowly. By 1940, millions of American kids were identified as having some kind of handicap. This led to innovations like special sight-saving classrooms. Interestingly, methods developed there were often found to be good for all kids and got adopted more widely. And a major milestone was the first school for the deaf in America, founded by Thomas Gallaudet in 1816.
Okay, so how are all these schools governed? Who was in charge?
Well, the U.S. Constitution doesn't actually mention education. That silence meant control defaulted mainly to the states.
Not the federal government.
Primarily the states. This led to state boards of education being created. Massachusetts had one by 1837. And county superintendents emerged to provide oversight closer to the local level.
But there were lots of tiny school districts back then, right?
Oh, yeah. And there was a long, often bitter and protracted struggle to consolidate them into larger, supposedly more efficient units. They often ran into farmer stubbornness and deep-seated fears of higher taxes or losing local control.
And the local school boards themselves weren't always perfect.
No, they faced criticism, sometimes for getting caught up in partisan politics or the spoil system, hiring people based on who they knew or their political connections rather than their qualifications. These were real challenges to academic freedom and professionalism. It's telling that when Australia looked at the U.S. system, they admired parts of it, but specifically decided not to adopt our model of powerful local school boards.
Interesting. Okay, let's shift to more contemporary issues. The teaching profession itself. What were the big challenges?
Money has always been a big one, unfortunately. Teachers' salaries historically lagged way behind other professions requiring similar education. This led to real financial hardship and eventually strikes. Detroit and New York City saw big teacher strikes in 1947.
Strikes back then.
Oh, yes. And the National Education Association, the NEA, even took the drastic step of imposing sanctions on an entire state, Utah, in 1964, basically boycotting it over low salaries.
Wow. It really puts today's debates about teacher pay in perspective.
It really does. These fights for fair compensation have a long history, and it connects to the whole effort to professionalize teaching, moving away from the old idea that anyone can teach towards stricter certification standards.
But there were always debates about that, too.
Always. Debates about what makes a good teacher, what role colleges of education should play, how to get the best young adults into the classroom. And shortages were a recurring problem, especially after the post-war baby booms hit the schools. Even now, things like pension plans, benefits, opportunities for advancement, those fringe benefits are often major factors when teachers decide where to work. Retaining talent is still a huge challenge.
And then there's technology.
Yeah.
Always promising to change everything in the classroom.
Always the promise. Educational TV started back in the 50s. It was used for reaching more students, for teacher training, but administrators worried about the cost and whether it just led to kids passively soaking up information instead of actively learning.
Passive learning, yeah. What about teaching machines?
Those came along, inspired by factory automation. B.F. Skinner's machine, based on his behaviorist psychology, was famous. These devices gave immediate feedback, let students work at their own pace. The idea was it could handle the rote material, freeing up the teacher for more complex interaction.
And language labs.
Those were a big deal, too. Finally, a way for students to easily hear native speakers, record their own voices, and compare pronunciation. It was seen as a way to fix the notoriously bad foreign language instruction of the past and helped kick off the FLES movement, foreign language, in elementary schools.
But technology always brings up fundamental questions, doesn't it?
Exactly. Whether it's TV, teaching machines, computers today, they're tools. They drive innovation, sure. But they also force us to ask again, how do children actually learn best? What's the teacher's role in a tech-filled classroom? The tools change, but the core questions often remain.
Innovation wasn't just about tech, though. School organization changed, too.
Right. Team teaching emerged as an alternative to the one teacher, one classroom model. You'd have a team, maybe a master teacher, regular teachers, interns, aides handling large lectures sometimes, then breaking into smaller groups. It sparked debates about efficiency versus individual attention.
And getting rid of grade levels.
The non-graded elementary school, the idea was continuous progress. Let kids move ahead at their own pace. Avoid the frustration of being held back for slower learners and the boredom, the wide yawns for quicker ones. Tailor it more individually.
What about the school year itself?
The year-round school debate keeps coming back. Can we use school buildings more efficiently, provide more continuous employment for teachers? But it always runs into opposition over disrupting family vacations, summer activities, and deeply ingrained traditions.
Even the buildings themselves changed.
Dramatically. From just basic rooms, maybe little booths, to these complex modern structures. Think flexible spaces, operable walls you can move, sophisticated heating and cooling systems. The design goal became adaptability, trying to build schools that could handle future changes in education we can't even predict yet.
Okay, last big area. Dealing with differences among students and refining what's actually taught. Gifted education got a big push after Sputnik, right?
Oh yeah, the Sputnik shock in the late 50s created panic that the U.S. was falling behind scientifically. Suddenly, there was intense focus on the gifted student program lag.
So what do they do?
Well, debates flared up. Should gifted kids be accelerated, skip grades, go to college early? Or should they get enrichment, stay with their age group, but study topics in greater depth? And there was always the tricky problem of identifying giftedness, especially in kids who were creative but maybe didn't fit the mold, the nonconformists like Mark Twain or Churchill, who apparently hated school.
Right. What about students facing disadvantages?
There were important efforts there, too. New York City's Higher Horizons program was a standout success. It specifically aimed to raise the aspirations and achievement of kids from disadvantaged backgrounds, the culturally deprived, as they unfortunately termed it then. It provided extra guidance, cultural experiences, support. And it worked. Reading scores went up, dropout rates went down, showed targeted intervention could make a real difference.
But dropping out was still a huge problem.
A massive problem, called social dynamite in the source. And what was really concerning was that a high percentage of dropouts actually had normal or even above average intelligence. It wasn't just about ability. This led to urgent calls to rethink the high school curriculum, make it more relevant, and also expand adult education programs for those who'd already left.
And then, perhaps the biggest struggle, desegregation.
A long and tortured history indeed. You go from the Plessy v. Ferguson Supreme Court case in 1896, which established the awful separate but equal doctrine.
Which wasn't equal at all.
Not even close. To the landmark Brown v. Board of Education decision in 1954, which finally overturned Plessy, declaring state-sponsored segregation in schools unconstitutional.
But ending it wasn't simple.
Far from it. The court called for desegregation with all deliberate speed, but that vague phrase allowed for massive delays and resistance. Some places engaged in massive resistance tactics. The most extreme example was Prince Edward County, Virginia. They actually closed their entire public school system for 5 years rather than integrate.
Closed the schools entirely.
For 5 years. It's staggering. And even after legal segregation ended, the fight continued against de facto segregation caused by housing patterns and other factors, especially in northern cities. This whole struggle just underscores how deeply our schools are tied up with fundamental issues of civil rights and who gets opportunity in America.
Absolutely. And alongside these huge social battles, the curriculum itself was constantly being debated, wasn't it?
Constantly in ferment, as the source puts it. Reading instruction was a battleground. Phonics versus the look-say or whole word method. That debate still pops up. Then came the new math, the 60s, introducing concepts like set theory, even to first graders, very controversial at the time. And efforts like Project English tried to bring more structure and coherence to teaching English language and literature.
So wrapping this all up, it's been quite a journey. We've really seen those many springs and rivulets flowing together, from ancient survival needs to incredibly complex modern systems.
It's a remarkable story.
And what really comes through is that, especially here in America, our schools are pretty much what we, the citizens in each community, decide to make them.
That local control is key.
Right. So the quality, the direction of education, it really depends on having a well-informed citizenry. People who actually understand this history, understand the stakes, and care enough to get involved.
Couldn't agree more. And looking back at all those centuries of push and pull, tradition versus innovation, the individual versus society's needs, there's this one fundamental question that seems to keep coming up, doesn't it?
What's that?
In this incredibly complex, fast-changing world we live in now, should our schools mostly just reflect the society we have? Or should they actively try to lead it? Should they be trying to shape the future, challenge things, push us forward? It's a tough question. What kind of education do you, listening right now, think we should be advocating for? What's the goal?